So Galileo Galilei. When Galileo was still a young man, he discovered a new attraction, a novelty toy in Europe called the spyglass, a small device similar to a modern telescope that over relatively short distances, like between building balconies, you could spy on your neighbors. And it was a popular party toy for the rich and famous. But Galileo saw greater military potential for the device. So, he taught himself lens grinding. And with that new skill, he invented the modern telescope. He immediately marketed this new invention to the Venetian Navy. The Doge of Venice compensated him handsomely for it. And if Galileo had stopped then, he would have simply lived the rest of his life in peace and luxury. However, Galileo decided to start pointing his new device at the heavens. And as he began to look at the sky, he began to make observations that increasingly supported a heliocentric theory. He also advanced the theory by adding oval orbits, realizing that the planets did not circle the sun in a perfect circle, but rather in elongated orbits. Now, when Galileo first went to publish his work, the Pope actually gave him his blessing. However, he wanted Galileo to publish it as a theory alone. Galileo would not do this, and instead not only published it as a new fact, but went further. He then began to make arguments stating that because his new evidence contradicted scriptural passages that seemed to suggest that the sun orbited the earth, that those scriptural passages should be altered to reflect the new scientific discovery. This instantly put him on the radar of the Roman Inquisition, as such a statement amounted to heresy. He was tried before the Inquisition, though not in a brutal torture trial the way the Spanish Inquisition would. Now, actually, Galileo stayed as a guest at the papal apartments the whole time that the trial was being conducted. He had servants who were paid for by a foreign embassy. It was a relatively relaxing ordeal. The entire Grand Inquisition consisted of, I think it was Galileo, one judge, and a secretary who were present at the actual trial itself. Galileo was declared to have committed heresy and was forced to recant his statement. He was placed under house arrest. While under house arrest, Mr. Galilei actually completed some very useful experiments, including the observation that objects of different masses fall at the same rate, which is a revolutionary element of science that often is actually overlooked that was an achievement of Galileo Galilei. Now, Sir Isaac Newton. Naturally, everyone knows him for the theory of gravity, why things fall toward the earth. He also developed inertia as a concept, the idea that an object at rest will stay at rest until a force acts on it. An object in motion will stay in motion until a force acts on it. This was in contrast to Aristotelian theories, which argued that objects wanted to be in a state of stasis. So, for example, a common example that's used by a lot of historians of science is how Aristotle and Newton would both explain a cannonball. So, to Aristotle, the cannonball, even once it was initially propelled out of the cannon by the explosion of the gunpowder, once in the air, the force of the air moving behind the cannonball would have been sufficient to keep it propelling onward until it hit something. To someone like Newton, a projectile like a cannonball moving that way makes no sense. To him, Newton realized, no, it is that once in motion, the cannonball is liable to stay in motion until forces act on it, whether it be air friction hitting into a target or something like that. Or gravity pulling it down to Earth. Now, Sir Francis Bacon. So, Bacon is credited with two major advances. One is his work with the scientific method. And this is a method we still use today. And it involves which you have to ask a question, do background research, and come up with a hypothesis, test the hypothesis via an experiment, draw a conclusion, and then report your findings. He also devised a new idea of inductive reasoning as opposed to deductive reasoning. So what does that mean? So inductive reasoning means examining data and devising a theory which best explains all the evidence. Versus deductive reasoning, which is explaining data based upon an accepted theory. So it all has to do with how you approach it. So an inductive reasoning individual would start by asking a question. Or even without looking at a question, they'd look at all the evidence out there and then would come up with what explanation best explains all the evidence I've taken a look at. In deductive reasoning, quite the opposite. You're looking at a phenomenon and are trying to explain it based upon an accepted theory. If that makes any sense. So, that is the end of our notes on the scientific revolution. Thank you.